So let's start by installing Knex and creating a little function for accessing that in our backend. We're in the backend folder here, so I'll install Knex here and the PG library that we need to connect to it as well. And then we'll create a little file called getDB that will just return the database. And that doesn't need to be in the tRPC folder because we might need that elsewhere as well. This file simply creates a little Knex configuration, and it connects to localhost with the default port and with our database and user and so on. Obviously, this is not going to work in production, so we will need to do something else for that. But for development, this will work. We can now extend our public procedure with a piece of middleware that will create this transaction for us. If we go into our tRPC file here, and I will just paste this piece of code. So with transaction is a piece of middleware that will basically establish a transaction. So getDB returns us a Knex instance, and that has a transaction function. So with this, there is now a transaction in place. We will then try and run the next function, which is provided to us. This is how middleware works. So this will basically wrap whatever endpoint we're calling. And we will decorate the context that the endpoint is being called with this TRX value, which is our transaction instance. Once that has succeeded, we will try and commit the transaction. And if any error is caught anywhere in the flow, we will roll back the transaction and then throw the error again. So in order to use that, we will add this to our public procedure. So we'll specify use and then with transaction. This will now mean that the public procedure will be called with this TRX instance in it. Let's update our endpoint to actually fetch the service types from the database instead of just returning this hard-coded array. The way we'll do that is by updating our query function here. First of all, it needs to take the context, which is where the transaction lives on. And then instead of this array here, let's just fetch the service types from the database instead. I'll access the context. As you can see here, the transaction is available to me because everything here is properly typed. This is a Knex transaction, and the way I use it is I specify the table name in here, service type, and then I will select everything, and we'll just return these. Let me just update this to include the description, which was part of our schema. Now let's try and start our servers and access the web. Let's see what this looks like now. You can see that we get service type 1, which is what I had in the database. Let's try and add some service types. If I go in here and I can quickly insert, I have a little query here, service type singular. So I'm adding 2 service types. The names are furniture assembly and moving, and the descriptions are basic help and help with moving that requires a truck. I don't know, those seem like possible service types that someone might offer. We have inserted those 2 rows now. Let's try and refresh here. You can see that we now have these. So everything seems to flow now from the database to the backend and all the way to the front end. So that's great, but it's a little bit annoying that we had to remember to add the description to our schema. There were no squiggly lines anywhere. And in fact, as you can see here, if I hover over the service types variable here, it's this ugly any array type. It comes out of Knex, and Knex does have support for TypeScript. The way it works is that you provide it with a mapping from table names to interfaces, and it just so happens that Kernel can generate that for us. So let's try and go to our Kernel configuration here and add this. I will import generate Knex tables module, which is also from the Knex plugin, and I will add that as one of the pre-render hooks. So if I go to packages/schema and I run Kernel, you can now see that there's this file called Knex tables. Actually, let me just make sure that we always run schemalint as well. So I'll open the package.json in schema, and I will add a script for generating models. So this will run schemalint first and then Kernel, and then it will build with TypeScript in the end to make sure that everything works. Let's try and run that instead. There we go. We should now have this Knex tables file. So Kennel has generated this for us, and you can see that service type table is this composite table type where it uses the selector, the initializer, and the mutator respectively, and everything else for all the other tables as well. So Knex needs to know about this, and the way you do that is a little bit quirky, but basically what I found works the best for me right now is by using a / reference. We can set that up in getDB. I like to add that at the top. I'm disabling this linter rule because they are recommending that you don't do this. Maybe this should change in the future, but for now this works. So basically this is being imported now, and Knex will pick it up. We can now go into our router, and we should see here that this is now an array of service types. So if I try to do anything now, it will be validated with the type checker at compile time.
If you want to keep learning about how to build real-world apps with the latest technologies and other career-related topics, then start right now by subscribing to our channel and liking this video.